Chris?
Hi there, Uncle Trey.
Hey, how you doing?
I was recently speaking with my nephew, Chris K. He's 23 years old now, but when he was a teenager, he was quite an athlete. He was a state champion swimmer and a standout on his school's varsity basketball team. But during his years of competition, he sustained a couple of serious concussions. His parents got him checked out, and the doctors kept him out of sports for a whole year. Now, Chris was and is a big kid. He's the kind of kid the football coach sees walking down the hall and says, "Hey, you thinking about coming out for football?" And that's exactly what happened. The football coach asked him to play. And Chris's buddies were also pressuring him to play football. "Come on, man, you gonna be a wuss?" But with the history of concussions, folks around him weren't sure that this was a good idea. While he was mulling it over, he asked me my opinion.
I remember at the time knowing your mom was really concerned and that, that she was never going to be really happy about it. And I said, I think you might want to just, let this go. What you said to me right after that is you said, "Uncle Trey, I think you've been taking too much Vagisil."
Oh man, that does sound like me back then.
It really stuck in my mind, and I kind of thought that what a bizarre connection. I mean, I was worried about you. I was worried about your health, and you, kind of were talking to me as though like I was a girl or that I, was thinking from my vagina.
I don't remember that specifically, but I certainly could see myself saying that back then.
So this kind of whole idea that you got to kind of step up and be a man and kind of do the manly thing.
Oh,
right?
Sure. I mean, most of my relationship with my dad growing up was traveling around the country and playing basketball or competitively swimming. So it was constant competition. It was constant competitiveness. Yeah. And that's kind of what he drilled into me was, to be tough, to, suck up all your injuries, etc. I mean, I'm sure he said, "Be a man or don't be the inverse" several times.
Suck it up and be a man. How did we get to this? From West Virginia Public Broadcasting and PRX, this is Us and Them. It's the podcast where we tell the stories from America's culture divides. I'm Trey K. That conversation with my nephew, Chris K., and that Vagisil comment, it really stuck with me over the years. But what brought it to mind was recently listening to an excellent podcast series called Men by my friend John Biewen from the Scene on Radio podcast. If you haven't heard it, you should. John's really doing important work, and I love it because the things that he dives into are very us-y and them-y. Like last year, John and his co-host, Chenjerai Kumanika, produced a multiple-part series called Seeing White, which smartly and sensitively examined the history of white privilege. And as a follow-up, John partners with veteran journalist Celeste Headlee on this Men series, and they dig into another complicated subject, that of the patriarchy and male domination throughout history. It's a deep dive into how, when, and why men invented the patriarchy. The Men series starts off with John speaking with people at a strip mall in Durham, North Carolina, and he asks them, why do they think that throughout history, males have had a privileged and dominant societal position over women?
I mean, the obvious answer would be back to hunter-gatherers, to when men were out providing, being the provider, if you will.
Well, I have to go back way before Christ. Why? Because God created man first, so man was in control first.
So that was the way it was intended?
That was the way it was intended.
Well, I think it goes back to the caveman days. I mean, who ruled the cave? The man.
I spoke with John and Celeste about their journey exploring this topic, which seems as timely as ever. I wanted to pick their brain and see what they learned about men's role in society and how we got here, and to see if I could learn a thing or two for myself.
John, I love the montage that you do in the beginning series where you go to people, I think at a strip mall in Durham, North Carolina, and the questions that you ask and the responses that you get are completely predictable to me. What was that experience like of going and speaking to those people?
Well, that's always just an awkward thing to do, and it's one of the least favorite things to do as a radio producer, to just walk up to strangers. But it was really by design to capture what I expected, the sort of predictable answers to questions like, how did men kind of seize the upper hand in the first place? And to have people talk about the cavemen being physically stronger, or to talk about being God's will that be the case, and just kind of illustrate the way that we tend to think about these things, frankly, in our ignorance.
Throughout this Men series, John and Celeste speak with significant thinkers, historians and social scientists, like Meg Conkey, a professor emerita of anthropology at UCLA. She's an author who's spent around 50 years doing archaeology in the French Pyrenees.
I didn't like this concept of the caveman. It sort of rubbed me the wrong way in terms of as if our past was all these men dragging women around by the hair. And I also realized archaeologically, a lot of the time they actually didn't live in caves. So the whole idea of a caveman, and then of course its extension, the sort of inner caveman that some men feel they need to express, sort of bothered me. And I said, okay, I've got to go back to some of the basics.
I just love how you have these archaeologists say, well, not so fast. That's really not the way that it was. Celeste, did you know that history? Was there something about that surprised you in John's reporting on that?
It did not surprise me in the least. I've known that history for a very long time, including the very questionable usage of the word caveman. It's there. Like some of the best minds in the world have been telling us this now for some years.
But as you heard in that montage of voices, the notion of the primitive caveman as the ancient model that determined the social order between the genders, Celeste Headlee says that's something that's deeply embedded in the psyche of many people.
We tell each other fairy tales. And when you report something that goes against that fairy tale, everyone goes, wait. Goldilocks liked the baby bear's porridge, not the mama bear's. I tell it right. So it's always encouraging when someone who's in the position of privilege and power is willing to actually break that fairy tale apart in a way that's perhaps less flattering to them.
So much of this series really gets down to really how the patriarchy was established. And I would just like to ask you quickly, I mean, I know it's a tough question and a complex question, but how do you think the patriarchy emerged?
We don't actually know. So let me tell you a totally nerdy, wonky answer, which is that when human beings became farmers and stationary instead of traveling around all the time, childbirth became very different. It became more dangerous. And also, women ended up taking care of allowing babies to, say, nurse for a longer time, et cetera, et cetera. So childbirth it became a longer period of downtime for women than they had for human beings for most of their existence. And I have to assume that during that time, men stepped in to fill that gap. In general, when people have the chance to seize power, they generally do. And once they have power, they generally try to protect it.
And I guess that, as Celeste would say, that there has been kind of like a fairy tale or a myth or something to kind of fortify that decision of the hierarchy between the genders, right? That's basically what we have seen in the intervening years, no?
Yeah, one of the absolutely central points that our series made was that this notion that there's something kind of natural about this hierarchy, that there's something inherent to the way that quote unquote men and quote unquote women are in some innate way that led to this division, these divisions of labor in this hierarchy. That's just baloney. It's socially constructed, and we can construct society along different lines.
Well, and it seems like when we come to the present day and we come to the feminist movement, and I'm really drawing a quote from your series, which is that all that feminists are talking about is equality. And that's literally what feminism is. It's the equal treatment of both genders. Why do you think that there is such backlash and a negative connotation to the word feminist?
That requires a linguist to actually go back, because it's been used as a weapon. There's all kinds of words that have been used rhetorically in order to make them an insult, and feminist is one of them. And this is about the fact that for a very long time, guys like John have enjoyed a privilege, an edge, an extra, a bonus that I, as a feminist, want them to lose. I want them to lose so that the rest of us can step up onto an equal footing. And of course, some people are going to try to protect that, and they're going to try to protect that really fiercely, and they'll use every weapon at their disposal, even going to making the word feminist a nasty word.
One of the most powerful episodes of the season comes about halfway through. It's an episode called Himpathy, a word coined by writer and philosopher Kate Mann, which is a mashup of the pronoun him and the word sympathy. It's a phenomenon where people, men and women, seem to extend sympathy to a male perpetrator. And it's often a lot more consideration than what's given to the victims of harassment or sexual assault. Celeste Headlee experienced this firsthand at WNYC in New York as co-host of the program The Takeaway. Her hosting partner was veteran journalist and author John Hockenberry. In 2017, Celeste and several female colleagues went public with allegations that Hockenberry harassed and bullied them. Celeste spoke about her experience on the Men series.
I lasted the longest, that was 3 years, and John constantly cut me off, talked over me, took stories from me from himself. Every day was exhausting. Just sitting a few feet away from someone who screamed and ranted and insulted and demeaned me on a pretty regular basis. Those are 3 of the hardest years of my life, particularly because the institution that was supposed to protect me was actually protecting my abuser and paying him almost double what I was making for the exact same job.
Celeste says Hockenberry bullied her, but in some news reports, other women did accuse him of sexual harassment. They say he sent them unwanted sexual or suggestive messages. The Scene on Radio Himpathy episode features a sexual harassment story that hit me really hard. Janie Williams tells about a sexual assault by her ex-boyfriend, and when she tells her friends, and even her mom, they all seem to be very protective of the ex-boyfriend.
My own mother's strongest emotional response when she learned what he had done to me was extreme pity from Matthew. And the thing is, I get it. My mother was right. A big part of the reason I didn't tell anyone right away was that I wanted to protect Matthew. I didn't want him to lose all his friends. But perhaps it is worth meditating on a moment. I tell my friends and loved ones that I was sexually assaulted, and the result is a surge of pity for the perpetrator, an instinct to protect the perpetrator, and really not much thought at all about me.
I listened to that episode a couple times, and I wanted to relate one story to you back to my college days in Ohio, where a woman who's still a friend of mine, and she had confided in me that she had been raped in school at a party. And it turned out to be a guy who was a friend of mine and who lived in my dorm. And I remember for years, I just assumed, oh, she's just being dramatic. That didn't really happen. And because of your episode, I had to call her up. Wow. I had to call her up and kind of talk about it. And I got to that thing that you talk about, which is I felt that I was part of that culture that I think needed to prop up the guy.
I can't even imagine going back to the people who literally left me in harm's way, who didn't protect me, who didn't listen to me, and asking them why. I mean, I work with some of these people still today and have not had those kind of open conversations because it's too painful. It's mortifying. So the kind of bravery it took for her to do that is astounding. And then to find out that this is something that has been spoken about, that Kate Mann gave us a name for, means that it's common enough, right? Like, this is why it's the Me Too movement, because we find out these things happen enough. They're common enough. We should be talking about them. We need to be talking about them, and we're not.
That's Celeste Headlee of the Scene on Radio podcast's Men series. Coming up, where do we stand on gender equality?
Celeste is right. We're already hearing lots of voices that are saying, has Me Too gone too far? Is this being overdone? Which is crazy.
I'm Trey K, and this is Us and Them, which is supported in part by the West Virginia Humanities Council, the CRC Foundation, and the Daywood Foundation.
Music lifts us up and brings us together, even when we can't get together in person. Mountain Stage brings you live performances on the air, online, and in our podcast. They remind you how it feels to be in a live audience listening to live music. This is Larry Gross, host of Mountain Stage. Find a link to our stations and our podcast online at mountainstage.org.
You're listening to Us and Them. I'm Trey K. Today we look at a very sensitive culture divide, men and women. I'm speaking with John Biewen and Celeste Headlee, co-hosts of the recent Men series from the Scene on Radio podcast.
When I think about where we are now, a little more than a year after the Me Too movement, we've actually seen a conviction of Bill Cosby. The Harvey Weinstein trial seems to be, moving along. It makes me think back to when I was a kid growing up during the civil rights protests. And I remember where I grew up in West Virginia, my family at least, and the people around me, mostly white people, to my eyes, they seemed to be on good behavior with regard to the issues of race. Even though I was young and kind of just growing up, I could tell that the N-word was something that had been used and now we don't use it, that we were trying to change the way that we looked at people of color, etc. And then somewhere like a decade later, it seemed like people around me, the adults around me, they were kind of tired of doing it. And it was almost as though they couldn't wait to say the N-word again. And I'm kind of wondering if that's something that we might see with the Me Too movement going forward.
You don't see that happening already? I mean, that's already happening. That's what this backlash to Me Too has been. All of these think pieces about, has the Me Too movement gone too far?
Celeste is right. We're already hearing lots of voices that are saying, has Me Too gone too far? Is this being overdone? Which is crazy. It's just the tip of the iceberg, it seems to me. And I think the difference is in the perceptions has to do with whether you see sexism as this kind of superficial thing where, it's just sort of all about the 2% of men who are quote unquote bad, who are rapists and overt pigs, or whether you see an actual deeply systemic, structural, cultural phenomenon that will take years to reform and to revolutionize, and that it's absolutely a parallel with the way that racism works and the way that people see it. But there's a much deeper change that needs to happen.
But the change that needs to happen, I mean, if women could just kind of appeal to men and kind of reason with them and kind of help them understand things are not equal, and if we could just kind of get them to understand, then men would acquiesce and relinquish the power and share it with them. But I think that when I hear Celeste talk, and not just Celeste, many other women, that really doesn't seem to be working out. First of all, Celeste, do you agree with that? I mean, am I getting it?
I mean, it actually did work out for some women for a period of time. If you have like the baseline of basically very little power that so many women have enjoyed for so very long, some women could, I guess, get more privileges, earn more privileges by becoming what the men wanted, right? By fulfilling their role in the fairy tale, they could get a leg up on their other women. They would never be equal to the men, but they'd have slightly more power and privilege than other women. They would be a rich man's wife, or they would be whatever, the token female leader, manager in a business. But we're now at a point in history where the rest of the women in general are saying, okay, enough. That's also part of the patriarchy game. That also is part of the hierarchy that is keeping the majority of women unequal and unpowerful.
Years ago, I was in one of those Robert Bly-like men's group type of things, where a group of men, and we chanted and did martial arts and stuff like that, and kind of conjured up a lot of this kind of, masculine yang energy. There was this ethos or a way of thinking of the things that you wanted in life that you needed just to kind of go in and take them. Is that what women need to do at this point? Not ask anymore, but just to kind of go and take it?
Yeah, basically. I'm tired of trying to convince men with my statistics and beautifully argued points. It's not working. It hasn't worked. We've been trying it for hundreds of years. So at this point, it's not so much taking it. It's like, I'm just going to do this. Okay. You do what you're going to do. And if you're, a forward thinking guy like John Biewen or many of the other guys I know, you'll come along with me and we'll all benefit from each other's brilliance and innovation. Or you can go over there and stay sexist and do what you want to do. But either way, I'm going to keep moving forward.
Well, Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Many other people have said it in different sorts of words, that people don't give up power voluntarily. And so that's what we're talking about here. I do think that's happening. But yeah, obviously much more quickly in some areas than others. And you still have these statistics about things like corporate CEOs that are just ridiculous. What is it, 1 or 2% of those people are women. So there's just a lot of work to do.
Even in Hollywood, the number of female directors of Hollywood films fell last year. It went up in 2017 after the Harvey Weinstein stuff came out in late 2016. And then last year, it went right back down. So when you talk about the pushback and how quickly people want to go back to what they were doing before, there you go, in less than 12 months' time.
Wow. I hadn't thought of that, but wow. Can you paint a picture for me of what equality will look like in the future?
Look, I have no idea what equality looks like. I've never experienced it in my life. I've been a mixed race, single mother, female, my whole life. I have no idea what that feels like, what it might look like. But it would be great to simply be judged by the content of my character. It would be great to just have my ideas judged based on their merit, and to rise or fail that way than on whether it's coming from a woman. It would be great to be able to burst into tears at some point without having someone thinking, oh God, just the women are so emotional. I mean, look, life is hard. Life's hard for everybody. It would not be easy for me if I suddenly became white and male. Life's difficult, but I just have to imagine slipping on those shoes and having people giving me the benefit of the doubt and letting people, give me jobs to try stuff out that I have no experience in. And I mean, that would be something.
The future that I like to imagine is one in which, yes, there's equality of opportunity in terms of gender and race and everything else, but also that that those sorts of changes that come about from having, frankly, a more democratic society is that we have deeper changes in the society. I think it's true in one definition that feminism is just about equal opportunity and equal rights. But there would certainly be, for example, radical Black feminists who would say that there's something much more than that they're looking for, which is changes in society that go much deeper and that have to do with changes in our economic system and our political system and things of that kind, so that we're not only redistributing people on this ladder, but that also there are changes so that we don't have such a stratified society and more people are taken care of, and we have a kind of generally more nurturing and caring society than we have today.
Yeah, it's not a zero-sum game.
Celeste is right that men are going to have to give up some power and some privilege, but that it doesn't have to just mean, well, then we're going to be, ordered to wear corsets and to stay in the home.
Right, and I want to be clear that while men are going to have to give something up, they're going to get stuff. I mean, I think it's one of the great benefits of this series is that John in his reporting and in our discussions really focused in on how much the patriarchy is hurting men, how much men lose to this. So yeah, I mentioned that men are going to have to lose stuff, but it's possible the benefits will outweigh what you lose. It's really possible.
In the Men series, we hear from psychologist and author Terry Real, and he gets to the heart of the fallacy of male domination.
The lie of patriarchy is hierarchy, that you are above the world, you're above nature, and you're imposing your will, like a doctor on a patient or a mechanic on a car. You are above the system. This is called hubris. The Greeks understood it. Hubris, or overweening pride, was the essence of all Greek tragedies. This is where the men fell, was by their grandiosity and pride.
John, when you talk about men feel like that they're losing something by the possible diminishment of the patriarchy, it's like the prospect of a change, it seems like a brave new world to them.
Yeah, all I can say is that it doesn't scare me. Really, really doesn't. And I'm, if anything, I'm more clear about that after having done this project with Celeste than I was before. There's no question that I have benefited from both white supremacy and patriarchy, even though, my life is relatively modest and I'm not a corporate titan and so on. But I would like to live in a more feminist world. I really would. And that includes, just lots of things about our culture and our society that do not make me comfortable and do not make me happy. And a lot of them have to do with the fact that the place is dominated by, rather toxic male energy and all that comes with that. Most of this stuff, these gender expectations and gender roles and the cultural stuff that comes with notions of gender is overwhelmingly socially constructed and culturally imbued and taught. It's not baked into who we are as human beings. That means that men can change and live in a different, more cooperative way as well. So that's the world I'd like to live in.
That's John Biewen, host and producer of the excellent Scene on Radio podcast. Now, I believe he and his co-host Celeste Headlee's multiple-part series called Men is required listening. And one more thing. When listening to the Men series, I was really interested in John and Celeste's conversation about what it really means to be a man and how do you define this. And that got me to thinking about this conversation that I had with my nephew, Chris Kay, several years ago. Remember when he was asking me for my advice about whether or not he should play football after he had a bunch of concussions? And that I told him that it wasn't a good idea. But did you hear when he said, that sounded like me back then?
The way you answer it, it sounds like you've kind of reflected on it.
I think a lot of what has driven me to be successful beyond my athletic career was some of those values that I learned from just being like dumb and tough when I was a kid and just being resilient. So I still agree with that. Now, the part about inferring that women don't have that quality and don't be like them, don't be soft like them, as opposed to men, I certainly don't agree with that.
How come?
I've met some pretty badass women in my life, and I've met some pretty tough and resilient women in my life too, for sure.
I'm hoping that more men might have a similar revelation and that it might be the start of revolution. You've been listening to Us and Them. Our team for this show is me, Trey Kay, Samantha Gatzik, and Kate Smith. Special thanks to John Biewen at the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke University for allowing us to use some of the audio from the Men series on the Scene on Radio podcast. Oh, and if you haven't heard the Seeing White series, you really should. Michael Lipton and Tristan Lozow wrote and performed the S&M show music. Mark Lerner designed our logo. Rita Kristofi provides us images for the web. The wonderful people at PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting make Us and Them possible. So do grants from the West Virginia Humanities Council, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the CRC Foundation, and the Daywood Foundation. We'll see you next time on Us and Them.
Support for this podcast comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.